All right, welcome everyone to Google for Education Connected Classroom Summer PD session with the News Literacy Project. My name is Peter Adams. I'm the SVP for Educational Programs with NLP, and I'm joined by Megan Bird. Megan, would you like to introduce yourself briefly and your connection to Connected Classrooms?
Sure. My name is Megan Bird. I teach at Fireside Elementary in Phoenix, Arizona. I have a combo class, a multi-age 5th and 6th grade, self-contained gifted, so profoundly gifted kids. And last year, we got a lot of technology and a chance to really change the way that kids are learning. And with that, I found the Connected Classrooms community and came in really early to it and jumped on board bringing my students involved in these virtual field trips. And it just enriched our learning and brought everything so much deeper. The knowledge was amazing.
Great, thank you. We will be using the Q&A app throughout, so if you have questions, please use the Q&A app, use it freely. There will be times when I pose questions directly. So to get started, we're going to try to keep this really concise, but I have just some quick slides to share with you that have some examples of news literacy for those of you who may not be as familiar with the content area. It is a relatively new field, and it's an offshoot of media studies that's focused on assessing the credibility of information. Here are our social media links if you'd like to like us or follow us on Google Plus and join us. Obviously, you know where our Google Plus page is if you've joined us there, but we encourage you to interact on the Google Plus page today. And I thought I'd start with an example, and the video is not going to play very well over Hangouts on Air. But essentially, this came to me in a viral email, and as you can see, the subject heading at the top had many, many forwards, which is sort of a hallmark of something that's been passed along virally. This is an actual email. It actually came to me on March 15th of 2011, and it made a believer out of the person that sent it to me. It's a relative who sends me a lot of this stuff. And as I scrolled down, I saw that people were very convinced. One person even said in all caps, I have to admit this makes me sick! Exclamation point. And then I got all the way to the bottom of the email, and I got some kind of mismatched fonts and a hyperlink to a video. And when you watch the video, it looks to be 3 friends who are just kind of hanging out, drinking some orange juice, and they have 6 cell phones, and they put 3 of them on the table, and they kind of triangulate them around some popcorn kernels, and then they use the other 3 phones to call the first 3 on the table, so they all ring together, and then the popcorn appears to pop. So my question for all of you, and some of you may have seen this video, if you encountered this, first of all, what would you do? And you can use the Q&A app to, I think, comment there. So you can let us know what you might do if you encountered something like this. And we'll give you all a second.
Such a powerful example for students and for teachers, because I know my students brought this to me last year. It's one that everybody's kind of seen, and they wanted to debunk the myth. They wanted to be like a Mythbusters, you know, which I think is kind of this news literacy, is finding out what's really getting to the truth of things.
Right. So let's see if we can get the questions. Megan, maybe you can tell me what your first step would be if you found this yourself, and then talk a little bit about what your students did when they encountered it or how they encountered it.
Right. I think they got it probably through an email, or it searched also, and they brought it to me like, is this real? Like, how do we know if this works or not? And of course, being the age they are, and actually it was my first thought too, is try it. You know, let's all get it out and see if it actually works. But by looking at your project and some of the resources you guys have, there's so many neat ways to debunk it, other ways, using the technology and resources right at our fingertips.
Right. So again, the way to interact with us here, you can use the Q&A app. So if you look on the left side of your toolbar, if you're here on Google Plus, you can click the Q&A bubble, and you can comment there, and that should show up. So yes, Megan, I've shown this video to a lot of groups of students, and actually the first thing they do is that they start looking for ways to try it. So who has their phone? Who has a phone? And where can we get some popcorn? Which is great. And then we kind of push past that, and some people say, well, I would Google it. Some students obviously say they would forward it to all their friends immediately because it's amazing, and it's a public health concern. So my next question for all of you is, what would your students do? Obviously, some students say they would forward it. Some students want to try it right there in the room. and some look on Google. And if they do get to some credible sources through a Google search, they would find out that this is actually a hoax video that is produced to feel raw. So it is not overtly an advertisement, but it is an advertisement. I think the agency DDB Needham did this piece for a maker of Bluetooth headsets named Cardo Systems. It kind of came out around the time of an FCC report about cell phone radiation, and Snopes has the story on it. There's another variation of it about a cooked egg, cell phones cooking an egg. Wired.com has a piece on it, and then the LA Times did a couple of fact-check scoops about it. So you can check that out. But this is a great example if your students haven't encountered this or have not already brought it to you. To a great kind of organic, real-world way to introduce news literacy in the classroom. Of course, there are all kinds of other examples, including the famous Jimmy Kimmel hoaxing the twerk accident that was completely staged after it went extremely viral and was even covered by lots of news orgs that either didn't bother to verify it or couldn't and went with it anyway. And the same with the Sochi wolf. And the impact of these kinds of things, as you can see, the views, this got almost 6 million views when I captured this image, and I'm sure it's much higher now. The stakes of information and misinformation can also be much higher. So in the examples of the Kimmel hoaxes, a lot of those were kind of fun, and you could argue that what's the harm in people believing that kind of hoax? But there are other examples like this fake iOS 7 update advertisement that had more of an impact. Megan, have you come across this at all, or your students?
Well, they haven't brought it to me recently, but it's definitely something I'm going to introduce in the fall. And I think there will be so much that comes out of it, because I mean, there is a problem to these things, because my students take things that look like a credible news source or something on YouTube, and they take it as truth.
Right.
They know how to filter some of it, but they don't know how to look deeper in all of it and question things.
Great, yeah. So this example I have up on my screen now is actually a fake advertisement that some members of an internet community created to prank people who downloaded the new iOS 7 update. You might remember maybe 8 months ago or 9 months ago, Apple released a new operating system, and people on your social media feeds were probably talking about it, and friends with iPhones were probably talking about it. And so this group online made some fake ads, and they're very savvy, and they are very good graphic designers, obviously, and these ads look like they're produced by Apple. They're very on-brand, and they asserted that the new iOS 7 would seal your phone if it sensed enough moisture. And that it was, in a sense, waterproof then once you downloaded the update. And there's a vine of a young man who tries this and ruins his phone. So this really drives home kind of the stakes of information. There are also other hoaxes, obviously. A lot of people know about this hoax that Elon Gale, who's a producer for The Bachelor, staged a whole conflict with a woman on a flight who didn't exist over Thanksgiving. Luke Montgomery is an activist who faked a letter from a grandfather disowning his daughter for disowning her son for coming out. It's kind of a convoluted story, but it's an activist creation. It's not an actual letter, but this went viral as an actual letter. Dana Morales was a waitress in New Jersey, a former Marine, who faked getting stiffed on a check, and it was later revealed that she staged it to get lots of attention. There's a viral email with receipts about the use of food stamps and food benefits in public assistance in Michigan. There are viral emails with receipts making assertions about the Affordable Care Act, or the so-called Obamacare. And there are many more examples that you can come across if you just kind of track it in the everyday world. This was supposedly how the Dutch Prime Minister met Obama today. That's an old picture of the Dutch Prime Minister taking a bike ride. He was not greeting the American president that way. Sometimes playful corporate campaigns are taken seriously, so some people believe that American Eagle had a line called American Beagle. This was not true. A young man in, I think, Maryland faked a Twitter announcement canceling school by just changing the Twitter handle by one letter, and enough people believed it that they actually had to cancel school. There was no way to put that false alert back in the bag, and that's another testament to the power of information. May not be an idea you want to give your students, but it's a powerful example nonetheless. And there are lots of fake Twitter handles for news orgs and other credible news sources. So these are just some of the fake profiles for CNN, and some of them tweeted that a plane was down in the Hudson River, but this is an old image of a plane that went down several years ago and landed safely in the Hudson. And there was a rumor about buffalo running for their lives in Yellowstone, and so on. So all of this sort of frames what news literacy is and kind of makes the case for it. Since information is the basis for the decisions that young people make and everyone makes, and our decisions are the basis for our actions, it's very important that the information that we base our decisions and actions on is credible. And I think this generation faces a tougher challenge than ever before determining the credibility of information, as Megan has mentioned a little bit. And 84% of teens themselves say they need help gauging what can be trusted. And so news literacy, the short definition here, is the set of critical thinking skills that help young people consume and create credible information across all media and all platforms. And obviously there's much more information and media than ever before. So I'm going to jump back in here.
I agree with all that you're talking about, Peter, and I think it's so important to make sure that we do share this with students, because I think, like when you said, oh, we might not want to share that Twitter idea with them, we hesitate that they might try something like that,
right.
But I think it opens the door of, we know what's going on and we're teaching you about
right.
what's happening, so that they're making more informed decisions before they did a prank like that too.
Right. Right.
What a huge difference it might make, what problem it could cause, and teaches them to be more aware of the decisions they're making, because they have such a tough road as these digital natives. I mean, information is at their fingertips all the time.
Right.
And if through that, they have to make responsible decisions all the time.
Right. So access has been dramatically expanded, and the amount of information to wade through is dramatically expanding. The amount of information on the planet, the cumulative amount of information on the planet, is doubling now by most estimates about every 2 years. Yeah, so...
And that's what's so nice about having things like your organization and Connected Classrooms, where we can put them in touch with experts that are truthful, that we have backgrounds, in what it is. It's not, because you don't know what to trust on the internet. Yeah. When they're researching, it's hard to teach those research skills in this information age.
And I think now, as educators, and particularly progressive educators, get interested and more focused on authentic, sort of real-world learning, the touch points with news literacy. News literacy is just a foundational, authentic learning skill. I mean, if you're going to use any kind of real-world information, figuring out what you can and can't believe is an absolute, must. And the news, if you use news in the classroom and current events, is also a great way to bring the real world into the classroom. So I thought I would run. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just saying that's why it has so much buy-in with students, because it is real world. It's touching what's happening in the world, and then teaching them that life skill that they need, because we are into authentic learning and problem and project-based learning all the time, and this just helps it all get better.
Right. Right. So I thought I would run through the focus of this particular Hangout is just supposed to be a quick rundown of how the News Literacy Project has started to use some digital tools. Megan has checked out some of our digital tools and has some comments and ideas, and I'll have some questions to kind of pose for all of you. But I thought I would just start out by talking you through kind of the evolution of NLP's digital work. We launched with a classroom program that was a 3 to 4 week drop-in unit in English language arts and social science classes mostly. Some journalism classes, and those units had sort of 3 phases: teacher-led lessons, and then visits by journalist volunteers, and then a final project that students did either collaboratively or individually or in small groups. And we began doing individual video conferences when and where either journalists couldn't make it into the classroom, or the teachers were interested in subject matter experts on a particular topic. So if we had a teacher who was studying the political situation in Egypt, we might Skype in a journalist who is either reporting from Egypt or has reported from Egypt, whether they're still there or not. And I can pull up our directory of journalists just to give you an idea of the subject matter experts that we've used, and we encourage our teachers to let us know. You know, we have program coordinators who work with our teachers, and so they can request particular. Sorry, I'm trying to screen share and talk at the same time. They can request particular. See if that did it. Megan, are you able to see that screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So we have a roster of journalist volunteers. Some of them are in Chicago, many of them are in New York, many of them are in the Washington, D.C. area. Those are our three sort of active regions. So teachers might, you know, in Chicago might Skype in, you know, Ron Claiborne, who is in New York, or David Gonzalez from the New York Times, who's in New York, and teachers in New York might Skype a Chicago or a DC-based journalist in. So that's been a really interesting tool for us. And so that sort of evolved into a digital unit. So we figured out that our reach was very limited with these classroom units. So we created a digital unit with digital lessons, and then instead of a live journalist visit to their classroom, we did video conference or virtual visits with journalists. So just to give you an idea of what these look like. So some of them are computer-based trainings, and I hope this is showing here well enough. Again, the video and audio is not going to play very smoothly, but this is an activity we call the information neighborhoods. Essentially, students are taught how to determine the primary purpose of a piece of information, whether it's there to inform them, to persuade them of something, to sell them something, or to entertain them. So there are 7 information neighborhoods, as you can see. Those just faded up on the bottom of the screen. And so in this activity, this is a follow-up activity to them learning about the 7 information neighborhoods, and then they have to try to categorize each example. And again, they're just categorizing it based on the primary purpose. Lots of pieces of information can have multiple purposes. The Colbert Show, for example, can be informative, but its primary purpose is to entertain you. So this is a very basic activity that we digitized for students so we could expand our reach. Another lesson that we digitized with one of our journalist volunteers here was a lesson about context. And so he plays different examples of information that are taken out of context, and then he puts them back in context just to show the power of context. So, you know, Mitt Romney being taken out of context on his comment about liking to be able to fire people, President Obama being taken out of context about raising taxes, an interview with a young boy in Chicago that was edited out of context, that kind of made the story more sensational, but it wasn't accurate at all, and CBS Chicago actually caught a lot of criticism for that, and so on. So he goes through those and shows. And then we have, as part of that unit, a live interaction with a journalist. And I thought I would go ahead and share this link with everybody so you can check these out. And they're dated here on our website. This is an unlisted page on our website, so it's kind of a Connected Classrooms exclusive. But we have done quite a few of these. So when teachers are doing our digital unit, they all get online. The one synchronous event or real-time event as part of the unit is a live virtual visit with a journalist, and then the students, you can't really see in this view, but they can chat and ask questions, and we can ask poll questions of all the users, and it's a really rich interactive experience, and the students and teachers have given really great feedback on this, and obviously so
is that something we can sign up for, Peter? Because that's what my question was going to be, is getting involved in this as a classroom.
Right now, but we are totally open to chatting about that. Let me stop sharing my screen. Right now, so the challenge for us in schools has been bandwidth. For this to be a one-to-one experience, we need quite a bit of bandwidth. So we actually deliver learning kits of flash drives and headsets, so all the media stays local and there's no buffering. And for us to deliver those physical kits, schools have to be in our 3 regions of New York, DC, and Chicago. And we do have some versions that we can host online. And for the remainder of the fall, we're doing the unit at no cost. So I would say any teacher that's in the room should definitely reach out to me if they are interested in doing this unit. This is another kind of Connected Classrooms exclusive. This is not something we could offer on the open web to all teachers everywhere, but I would love to offer it to Connected Classrooms teachers here who are joining us. So we will figure out a way. Yeah, we will figure out a way if you would like to join one of our fall units to register you. I would say if you don't have the bandwidth to do one-to-one, you'll just have to do the lessons, the digital lessons, one-to-many. But we would love to have you join us. And
we actually do, luckily. We have one-to-one, and we have pretty good bandwidth, so we should be able to do something.
That's terrific. And I'm not sure if I can chat the URL for that.
That would be great.
Let's see if
we get an exclusive.
That's right. So we have one question. Can we ask the journalists to Skype into a classroom for classes that introduces news literacy? Yes, so the journalists Skype in. This is a question from Ms. Arandas. The journalists Skype in as part of our digital program in our 3 cities. So if you're in New York, if you're in Chicago, or you're in Washington, D.C., we have registration pages for you. I'm trying to figure out how to chat a URL here. Ask the question here of our experts behind the scenes. I don't think I can post this in the Q&A app. Maybe Megan knows how I can share a URL, but I will share the registration URLs. If we have anyone who's here from New York, DC, or Chicago, I'm happy to share the registration links. So we're going to push these out from behind the scenes. The first link we're going to push out is that link to the archived recordings of the journalist. So the first link we're going to share is the link to that webinar archive that I just showed you, and that is an archive of our past virtual visits with folks like David Gonzalez at the New York Times, and Matt Worker, who's an editorial cartoonist at Politico, and Fernando Diaz, who's the managing editor of OI Chicago, and Matea Gold, who's a political reporter at the Washington Post. And you'll just get a sense of how interactive these can be. If anything, they are an object lesson in how rich virtual learning can be with subject matter experts when you connect with them. And you can, if you have access to subject matter experts, you can connect to them and hang out with them in your classroom one-on-one. Or you can find an organization like the News Literacy Project who uses tools like Hangouts to bring subject matter experts as guest teachers into the classroom. And we're very careful to structure these learning experiences as lessons and not war stories, not career day. So these journalists have real lessons about the importance of documentation, for example, or primary sources and how they're changing in the digital age, or what a well-sourced story looks like. So our creation of these digital units got us thinking. We'll also chat out, the registration link for those of you who are in our 3 regions. It's my email. If anyone wants to take us up on the exclusive offer here in Connected Classrooms to do the digital unit, like Megan, outside of our 3 regions, we will set up links for you to access those and then get you in the virtual room so you can join our students from New York, DC, and Chicago. The other thing I should mention about these video conferences is that when you get students from 3 cities in one room, in one virtual space, it can be really powerful. So we have had moments, and they happen organically, where students interact with each other. So we had a reporter here in Chicago who covers crime, and crime in Chicago is a national story. And she wrote a piece about the term Chirac, which some people think is offensive, and other people think describes an important and useful reality. The students began chatting about nicknames for different cities. So a student in New York said, or a student in Chicago said, do any other cities or neighborhoods have nicknames like that? And the students in New York began answering them with nicknames that their neighborhood or their city had. So it was a really interesting moment where teens were sort of looking at the role that a nickname could play in glorifying teen violence and the stigma that it might attach, and how it paints too broadly and kind of promotes stereotyping and other things like that. So it was a really interesting moment, and that's one really rich element to these massive video conferences, because students can hear one another's voices as well. So this digital unit work really got us thinking about how to use these digital lessons a little more broadly. Before I go on, though, I want to ask everyone here, what kind of lesson do you think your students might need around this area of assessing the credibility of information, figuring out what to believe, how to detect? So native advertising, for example, might be one. So if you could chat those, and I think you can use the Q&A app just to chat. You don't have to ask a question. If you have an idea for a lesson that you think your students need, and I'm going to maybe ask Megan if she has an idea, like if there were one lesson that you could think of, my students really need to learn this. What concept or skill do you think that your students maybe struggle with the most in this field of news literacy that might help them the most, if I can put you on the spot?
Sure. In a broad sense, I think it's just believing everything that they read. You know, if it's a great source, then they're like, okay, it's fact, you know, without ever asking deeper questions, which is such a big thing now. We have to keep asking questions, and we have to keep going deeper. And then just looking at your project and your site made me think so many different ideas. And the one that really stuck out to me so far was the image one, checking images.
Yeah.
You know, how they can fact check if it's a real image or not, because we talk so much about copyright and using images. Right. You know, they go and find images and want to splatter them all over everything they're working on. Right. But looking at an image that's supposed to be real and finding out ways to find out if that's an actual, you know, image that hasn't been edited or photoshopped, I think is powerful. With them posting things everywhere and all the social media, I think that can be a really important one.
Right, and you kind of highlighted the tendency for young people to believe everything. I think there's a simultaneous and contradictory impulse for students to believe nothing at the same time. So there's this really bizarre, disempowering cynicism to say that, you know, everything, I'm not going to believe anything unless I see it with my own eyes, which from a civic engagement standpoint is just beyond disempowering, right? So we really try to convert some of that cynicism, as understandable as it may be, to skepticism. So if skepticism is the default posture of caution, which is healthy, cynicism is the default posture of disbelief, sort of categorical disbelief, that if something could be nefarious, or it could be faked, or there could be a conflict of interest, I'm going to dismiss it out of hand, and that just sort of doesn't get you anywhere in the world, and it certainly doesn't get you anywhere as an engaged citizen. So that's really interesting as it kind of coexists with this tendency to believe everything, and especially images. Images can be very, very convincing, even though we know that extraordinary photo manipulation software exists. So we don't have any. I don't see anything popping up on the Q&A app, and forgive me if I'm missing any of these ideas. But so we've taken ideas like this. So, you know, Megan had an idea about how her students tend to see all information as equal, right? So in the digital age, you might see a blog post, and you might see a story from the New York Times, and you might see a peer-reviewed academic paper, and students sort of think that if information is published anywhere, they just grab the URL, and then it's all been published, and it's all sort of equal, without drilling down, as Megan said, and looking at what makes something credible.
Well, and Wikipedia and About.com, that's what they want to use for sources, you know, and teaching them to go beyond that. And I think the age my students are such a good age for grabbing. They're not cynical yet. They're more just, you know, skeptical and figuring things out, and they have such a big intellectual curiosity. It's really going to be such an exciting age for them to start into this kind of work.
So the lessons that Megan is talking about are on our Learn channel. If you go to our homepage, which is at thenewsliteracyproject.org, and then you click on Learn here in the main navigation bar, you'll see our first 7 lessons that we've added to our Learn channel. This is a relatively new site. We rebuilt our site about a year ago, and we've done 7 so far. We are adding about 1 a month, and actually it's ironic you mentioned Wikipedia. That's coming up later this year. In partnership with the Chicago Public Library. So we have subject matter experts from the Chicago Public Library explaining, you know, what's the deal with Wikipedia and credibility. And the lesson that Megan's mentioning is photo fact-checking in the digital age. This one is actually with one of our staffers, Mary Owen, who's a former reporter with the Chicago Tribune, and she explains reverse image search and how you can search not just with words and phrases, as many of you probably know, but you can actually search an image. for other instances of that image or similar images. So you kind of get all the iterations of an image, and you can usually get back to the original image and see how, if it's been manipulated and how. One of these lessons that I want to highlight that I think is particularly useful for teachers is this consumer's guide to sourcing in news reports. So one of the mainstays of news literacy is the idea that students and the public at large, and consumers of news and information, can use the standards of quality journalism as a kind of yardstick to measure the credibility of information. So however imperfect in practice these standards may be, their ideals, their aspirations, but knowing what the aspirations are is extremely useful for consumers. And so one of those standards is to source something very well. Right? This is a standard that exists in newsrooms across the country, but not enough young people and not enough consumers of news and information generally know to really look at the sourcing in a careful way. And so Paul Saltzman at the Sun-Times, who's an editor there, in this lesson explains 7 things that you need to look for when you assess sourcing in a news piece. And what's interesting about this one is that we've taken it, and if you click here at the bottom when you go to this one, if you're an educator who wants to use it in the classroom, you get an e-learning view of this Learn Channel item. So it has a learning objective with kind of Bloom's taxonomy optimized language. You get Common Core State Standards alignment. It's aimed at the 9-10 grade band, but teachers in middle and upper grades can scaffold from there. And the difference with this lesson is it doesn't just play as a video. There are embedded formative assessment questions that pop up. And let me see, I know the video is going to be a little bit rough for the Hangout, but see if I can get them to pop up here, or if I can get it to play. No, perhaps not. So we used a tool called HapYak, which I'll show you a link to in a minute, to insert formative assessment questions here. And then we give you a suggested way to use this in the classroom, although teachers, obviously, we encourage them to use the Learn Channel in whatever way is most useful to them, to really treat it as a repository of e-learning objects. And there's a quiz we link to as a Google form. There's also an exam time quiz if you use that platform. And then we have a graphic organizer that you can use that helps students fill out the Saltzman 7 for an example of news that you choose. And then we ask for feedback. So we're looking at doing more of this with our Learn Channel and creating more e-learning views of the lessons that are already here and of the lessons that are coming up.
As a teacher, I can say those resources are invaluable because we get a lot of online, here we've got a lesson for you, but you've gone and created so many resources for us, like the quiz and a link to a Google form or another platform. That's so much more than we usually get in a digital resource. It's really nice to have that laid out for us. I think people will be much more, willing to jump in and use it. Great,
that's good to know, and that's our hope. That with these can be ready to do off the shelf, but they're also really fertile ground for teachers who want to be more hands-on or maybe have the time to spend with the lesson to adapt it in whatever way they want, and then share our story with us on Google Plus or on one of our other channels. Or just email us about it. The other thing that teachers find really useful is something that's an offline resource. So this is going to be new for Megan because she just browsed our site, but she didn't get to go to what we call our Lie Detector Challenge. And this is, I'm going to pull it up here. So we post,
cool.
we post a different piece of dubious information. So this is information of indeterminate credibility. On the first of the month at our website /Lie Detector Challenge. And so this month's is an assertion by the Adobo Chronicles that the American Psychiatric Association made a selfie a mental disorder. So if you click on it, you go to the actual example of information. And then, this was published by Adobo Chron, so the Adobo Chronicles. So there's no byline of a person you can necessarily check out. So that's one piece to the puzzle. They use an AP photograph. So this may or may not be true, or often there's a little bit of truth and some misinformation and misleading information mixed together. And those gray areas are such fertile ground for really deep and substantive critical thinking. So this is where, in my view, the critical thinking rubber really hits the road. for students, and in a way that is very interesting, because immediately you can imagine that pulling up this example of information would act like a really well-engineered essential question and just cause students to immediately begin discussing whether or not this is true, and maybe whether or not selfie is a mental disorder. So we think these examples are useful just as a repository for teachers. This is our staff, shares examples all month long, and then we pick what we think is the best one for teachers to use in the classroom. We also, if students want to participate in our lie detector challenge, we have an embedded Google form where one or two students together can submit a fact-checking report, and we ask them to 5 obvious things they notice about the credibility, whether they're positive things that make it seem credible or things that make it seem not credible. We ask them to do some research and reflect, and then list some resources they use to find more information. If they can find more information about selfies and the American Psychiatric Association and so on, and then they submit it, and they have a chance to win a lie detector badge with the News Literacy Project, and then if they get it basically right, and we have a couple of editors, including Paul Saltzman, who's in that sourcing video, who judge it. So those that get it basically right get a badge, and then the best submission of the month, the most comprehensive fact-check submission of the month, gets a top watchdog badge. And then in our 3 regions, sometimes we award prizes as well. So this is and if you go to the bottom, you can go to our past challenges. So even if you don't want to use this as a standing extra credit assignment in your classroom, or you don't want to use it as an assignment and then have them actually fill out our fact-check report, that's perfectly fine. You can check out previous items. So these are all examples of information that we think they
would love that, or my students would. I know my students would be so engaged by that.
Great. And so we think these past detector challenges can just be useful for you as a quick do now, or if you have News Literacy Fridays and you have a different crazy example of information, you can pull it up, and we will supply a new one on the 1st of every month, and then this is a pretty good repository of things there. So that's kind of...
is that accessible to everybody too, or is that another thing that's kind of...
We'll call that another Connected Classrooms exclusive. So that's kind of an unlisted link that we've been playing with in our sites. So we treat our partners a little bit like a laboratory, and we ask our teachers, what's useful for you? And so we started hearing from teachers in PD that when I would show a slide deck, kind of like the one I showed all of you, they would say, where can I get those examples, because I want to use those with my students. So we started to look for ways to make those available, and then to build learning experiences around them, and even things we can help them credential and badge their news literacy learning as well. So that, and making it a contest, just makes it even more fun for students and teachers who choose to participate. So yes, I would say everybody here, and maybe we can post the link here to our lie detector challenge at the newsliteracyproject.org/lie detector challenge. And so we would love to see submissions come in from outside of our 3 regions. We'll kind of know that it's a Connected Classroom submission if that's the case, because this is the only place we've really talked about it. So I know we're a little short on time, so I'm going to kind of speed through a couple other things. Another kind of playful adaptation of video conferencing and digital tools that we've used, we took that video conferencing model, and we started to think, what else can we do by video conferencing? You can see here we have a video of a virtual panel discussion. So what we did is we did a Google Hangout with 3 journalists from OI Chicago, from the Sun-Times, and from the Tribune about the ethics of and the challenges to covering crime and communities and teens in Chicago. And this was a topic that teens themselves thought of at a school we were working with called Social Justice High School here in Chicago. And so you can see the students at Social Justice here, and I was kind of moderating, and then we had our 3 journalists in the room, and so I led a short discussion, and then we took student questions at the end. And again, the video quality is not going to play extremely well. See if we can get a shot of a student asking a question. So this was an instance where where teens could ask ask journalists, questions that they really wanted to know about coverage that they had seen or issues happening in their community, and that was a really powerful way to kind of adapt the video conference model by having multiple people presenting simultaneously and engaging in a kind of a virtual panel. Another resource, and we're not going to be able to delve into this, that I wanted to share is a TED Talk by a guy named Eli Pariser. Some of you may be familiar with him. He published a book called The Filter Bubble, and he's done a lot of thinking about the implications of personalization on the web, and what happens when algorithms on the web get to know your interests so well that they begin serving you different search results. And this can be a very positive thing. Obviously, if you're signed into Google and you're doing searches, Google is learning what you're interested in and seeks to kind of push that to the fore and bring things like that to your attention. But this can result in very different search results. So he talks about the advantages to personalization and then some of the challenges. I mean, you could structure some really interesting learning experiences around that. So you could have students sign into Google or go home and do a given search. So on the slide you can see here, he had two of his friends Google Egypt, and they got very different results. One person got political news about Egypt, and one got travel information because he likes to travel, and that's what is most relevant to him. But you could have your students do this and then sort of critically analyze the differences between their search results and what happens. So that TED Talk, we can chat that URL as well. And then the final thing I wanted to share. Give me 1 second here. I'm jumping back and forth between different things. Is another sort of unlisted page that we're playing with, just to kind of show you where we're headed. We've created a resources page for news literacy in the classroom, and we're working on a whole section of our site possibly that hosts tools, not just for news literacy, but other classroom resources, some EdTech tools that are really favorites of ours for doing really good PBL or lighter touch student creations. So we have some NLP resources here, our Teachable Moments blog, the Lie Detector Challenge that I mentioned. Again, this is an unlisted link, so we don't share this with everyone, but we'll share it here. And then our ideas for other places that you can pull information or examples. So On the Media is obviously a great show that's really rich in news literacy learning. The Washington Post publishes a column called What Was Fake on the Internet this week, so it has sort of a quick rundown of everything that they thought was notable, and so we use that resource a lot. Some other news literacy tools, including the Newseum's daily collection of front pages. So the Newseum, as some of you may know, has front pages from around the world, and this is a really rich news judgment exercise. So you can talk about what your local or the nearest major paper ran on their front page, and look at the differences between that and another paper or 3 or 4 papers, and sort of reflect on why, who got the news judgment right, and who, in their opinion, maybe got it wrong. If you think a news org made a real misstep and missed a story on their front page that should have been there, you can write a letter to the editor. So there's all kinds of things you can do with that. And so there are lots of interesting resources here, lots of interesting fact-checking resources here, and then some great EdTech tools. So we linked to a live binder collection that's really outstanding of different EdTech resources. Some of our favorites include Lucid Press and Blogster and Google Story Builder in the student media making and storytelling category, Camtasia and other screencasting tools, data visualization tools. There's so much open data available that students can access, and then taking those data sets and creating visualizations can be a really powerful learning experience. PowerPoint alternatives for presentations. So obviously there's Google presentations and Google Docs, but there's also Haiku Deck and Animoto and PresentMe and EduCreations, and then curation tools and some teacher tools. So here's that link to HapYak, which is how we inserted those formative assessment questions in that Learn Channel video. If you want to take a YouTube video and insert interactive questions into a streaming video, you can do that using HapYak, and there are some other tools here you can use. And then these are some really fun, kind of light touch student creation pieces. So you can have students create fake movie posters that reflect learning about one particular concept, and that can be a lot of fun with your students. There's a trading card generator, so they can make sort of fake trading cards. Here's one for William Shakespeare. You can create fake tweets. These are kind of practice tweets that are lower stakes than having tweets in your name on the open web, which can be a little bit fraught for students. And then memes. We actually had students make some memes. You can check it out. Check those out on our Google Plus page. I think they're posted there. Those can be really a lot of fun and rich news literacy learning creations, and they can share with other people. Kids get really into meme generation. And then we do have some videos that we posted. We did a very intensive 2-hour-long virtual PD for a select group of teachers in the spring, and we kind of cut that into pieces, so you can check out that if you're more interested in going deeper on news literacy. That's all there. So that's all at /resources, and again, that's a page that we're just kind of playing with. So as we kind of draw to a close here, I know we're almost through an hour, and we aimed for about 40 minutes. I wanted to open up the floor for questions from teachers. So again, you can use the Q&A app to comment on anything. It doesn't have to be a question, but if you have a question, I'd love to see you pose it there. And then any final thoughts and reflections from Megan. So maybe Megan can offer some thoughts and reflections while any participants are typing up their questions for me, for Megan, about news literacy generally. And again, we'll post, we've posted all the links in my email so that you can get in touch. Megan, any ideas or questions for me or insights that you want to share?
I'm just excited about all the resources you're sharing with us. Being new to a 1-to-1 environment, actually I have 3-to-1. I'm pretty lucky with what technology we have.
That's great.
I'm always looking at ways of making that technology integration meaningful, and not that that's their source of learning. That's the way to make meaning from learning. You know, like they don't just get all their content from the computer or the iPad or the Nexus. So now we have these tools to, give information and go out and use it meaningfully in authentic ways that they'll be using when they're searching things all the time. So I'm just really excited about using these resources, and I think it will be so engaging to the students because of so many different factors: the technology factor, the real world factor, the way that they're dealing with this stuff all the time. They see it in a tweet, and on Instagram, on Facebook, on a Vine. They're seeing all those things everywhere.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it is really, and if you just kind of keep your ear to the ground and even look at your own social media feeds, you'll see things that people share that you can bring into the classroom and use, whether they're true or whether they're not. And a lot of them include really great lessons for helping your students, sort and evaluate information in the digital age, which again is such a challenge. I mean, the students have this generation, and I think every subsequent generation will have an incredible challenge that sort of parallels the incredible opportunities. And I think it's really easy. I think a mistake a lot of people make is to focus either on the advantages of the digital age and sort of neglect addressing the challenges, or address the challenges and forget to highlight all the tools that exist. And so what we try to do is bring those together, and I've tried to share resources that help you appreciate both, right? So you can check out what was fake on the internet this week, but then you can use the fact-checking tools to sort of look into them and help students think critically about what they encounter. So there is a lot there are a lot of tools and methods for distorting things, for changing things, for manipulating things, for faking things, and then there are a lot of tools for detecting that and unwinding the story behind a piece of information to figure out what you can believe. And there are more tools than ever for student voice, for students to not just create something of their own, but to interact with journalists, to tweet at them, to post comments on blogs, to post comments on social media sites like Google+, and to really reach out and engage with media makers themselves after they have reflected and sort of have been empowered by that skill set of knowing what to look for and knowing what the standards are supposed to be. So that's something that we really encourage our teams to do as well.
Well, and I think the collaboration piece is so exciting, because I just immediately thought of my 1st and 2nd grade buddies. They're highly gifted as well, and having my students be able to do a lesson for them too. They get good at it in practice, and then share that information with the little ones, because they're searching too. They're doing research, and they're using the internet, and to catch it even earlier, so that they're starting to think about and critically evaluate what they're seeing on a different scale, but nonetheless.
So we have a good question from Jennifer Gwilt, that she says she's interested in looking at the statistics that are presented in news articles, and there are actually a lot of critical thinkers about how journalists use statistics. And sometimes journalists use them very well and very responsibly, and a lot of people don't understand statistics well enough to use them, so they're easy to distort, especially if you try to change the way they're configured. So Jennifer, I would say the best thing you can do, and this is something that Fernando Diaz talks about in his archived video conference with us, is that there is no reason in the digital age for a news organization not to link to primary documents. So if a news piece cites statistics, and if it's a print piece online, it should absolutely have a hyperlink back to the original report. So if they're pulling a stat out of the city data, if they're pulling a stat out of an academic paper or study, the mention of the statistics should be hyperlinked back to the primary source, so that you can check it out. And this wasn't possible in a print-only era. So in a Dead Tree newspaper, you can't link to the primary source. And obviously then they needed to have attribution there in the text, but then there was a certain level of trust that the consumer had to trust that they got it right. And sometimes they would, most of the time they would, and when they didn't, people would write letters, and then there would be a correction, or there should be, if there's an active critical public. But now in the digital age, there is really no reason for any media maker, but especially major news organizations, not to link to the primary source, so consumers can see for themselves where those statistics came from, what the methods were, and whether it was reflected accurately in the report. And that's an opportunity for a conversation. So there are some good talks, and I can't think of them offhand, about how journalists use or should use data, but I would check out the Poynter Institute and maybe Craig Silverman's blog, Regret the Error, and that is on our resources page as well. He blogs a lot about mistakes that happen, and I think he's blogged about how journalists use statistics. Obviously, Jim Romanesco does that too. So many media critics have taken on how journalists use statistics. So I would start there, and always remember that you should look for links to the actual source, the primary source. That's a great question.
And it's such a good discussion for teachers to have then with their students about misleading statistics. It trickles over to math and critical thinking in math, because they can't always put it in a real-world sense of how misleading statistics can be. So bringing it in this way in an article could be really powerful.
And if you're teaching a unit on argumentation, and I think this is a challenge for a lot of teachers, at least the teachers I meet here in Chicago, is how do I, and middle school teachers especially, how do I teach my students effective argumentation, how to use evidence to support a statement? Is a really key skill, but it's a tough one for 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. And I think you could build a collaborative or an interdisciplinary activity with a cluster of teachers around taking a statistic and reframing it to make it more convincing for one perspective or another, so they get a sense of how statistics can be manipulated or taken out of context, and that helps them recognize, how they should be used and how statistics would be used in a way that's fair, that includes all the information. And that could sort of teach them the difference between someone who's producing information with the purpose of informing you, which means they're trying their best to be neutral, even though perfect neutrality is impossible, right, for any human to achieve. It's still a worthwhile aspiration to try to be fair, and then have a second or even third set of eyes checking you to see, was that fair, and as many people as possible putting their heads around that common goal is very different from someone blogging and ranting in a very opinionated way using loaded language. So there are all sorts of opportunities to look at argumentation, and you could imagine an ELA teacher looking at tone and loaded language, and a social science teacher looking at the social issue and the range of perspectives on that social issue, and then the math teacher looking at how statistics were used. You could build really great sort of interdisciplinary units around that. That's something that we've chatted about internally for a while and never been able to get going in any of our sites, but it's a powerful idea. So I don't think there are any more questions, and Megan, unless you have other questions or comments, we can probably draw things to a close. We've kept people nearly an hour now, so but I think it's been a good session, so I hope we shared some useful things, and hopefully a lot of people will find the video archive of this on the Connected Classroom site and on NLP's site. So if no one has any other questions, I guess we will sign off. I want to thank Megan for joining us here for the full hour and for checking out all our resources and sharing her insights as a very forward-looking educator using a lot of digital media in her classroom. So her comments and ideas and questions were great, and I enjoyed being here. There's the link to Paris's talk that's there at the top. So we'll go ahead and sign off. Megan, thanks again.
Thank you.
Great chatting with you. All right. Thanks, everyone.